Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fall Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and tech leaders from all around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is Ian Crosby, a field CTO at Aptum. Ian, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me on today, Vid. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Ian, it's great to have you with us today. And let's start maybe with your story, right? Could you take us through your journey from the early days to your role as CTO at Aptum?
Yeah, sure. So I started off in software development. I did a computer science degree, and my first software gig was actually building command centers for the Canadian Navy, which was a really interesting space to be in. Also, was very archaic in terms of the technology that was used at the time, which was interesting. Did that for a while, and then I kind of moved into the modern world of SaaS startups. Moved to Silicon Valley, did that for a little while, and then started to get interest in the kind of DevOps space that was springing up. So with the advent of kind of containers and Docker, it seemed really, really exciting, and joined a small consultancy company that was kind of focused in that area. So started doing more consulting work and kind of moved up, started an office in Canada, and stepped away from that. Went back to product for a little bit, did some platform engineering for another startup, and kind of missed the consulting world. And now I'm back focusing on kind of professional managed services, helping companies who are trying to adapt and adopt kind of cloud and cloud technologies.
And speaking about the company itself, to offer our listeners some more insights maybe into Aptum, let's delve a bit into what the company does, right? So managing digital requirements can be quite challenging and expensive for businesses and businesses that try to handle everything on their own, right? So from what I've learned, this is precisely where Aptum steps in to offer its expertise, right? Isn't that correct? Can you maybe tell us a few words about the company?
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the central point there, right? Mm-hmm. We all know that the technology space, specifically around cloud, is very complex and it's constantly evolving. So staying on top of the latest trends, the new technologies, what new features your cloud provider has released, or maybe some changes around billing, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort. So if you can leverage a trusted partner to kind of handle that for you, that's a really big benefit. And that's really where we step in. And it looks different depending on different organizations. But basically the companies that we work with, they kind of identify what's core to their actual business, right? It's kind of this adage, which is a few years old now, but we talked about this idea of every company becoming a tech company or every company becoming a software company, which, in some sense, sure, tech and software has gotten a lot more important, but I think a lot of us have kind of lost the plot along that a little bit of like, most companies aren't software companies, right? Either maybe you're a financial institution and, you deliver financial services to your clients, or maybe you sell clothes or you sell books and you're an e-commerce. You're not actually delivering software. Software and tech is a huge part of what you do and it enables you. But at the end of the day, you have to know what is your core business and understand where you focus your precious kind of resources and time, and where does it make sense to leverage a trusted partner.
Okay, and given the fact that the majority of our audience are like a tech talent, tech leaders, tech founders, I think they would greatly benefit from your insights on the future and current trends within your niche specifically, right? So thinking about your experiences at previous companies and now at Aptum, you've been part of many I would say organizations like a cloud native journeys, right? So how has the cloud native tech scene changed, and what trends do you think will maybe influence its future direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so actually, I was just a couple of weeks ago. I was at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in Europe, and there was over 12,000 people there. And I was kind of reflecting on just 8 years ago, there was the first KubeCon in London, which was like a couple hundred people. So it's grown immensely, which is really interesting to see. And obviously, it's grown in terms of adoption, in terms of people that are coming in, right? So you look at those 12,000 people that are there, a lot of them are there for the first time. It means a lot of people are still adopting this technology. And it's more initial phases, it was really the technology that was moving very quickly. So new things coming out of new Kubernetes, new services around Kubernetes about observability, adding new features and everything. But as the technology got adopted by, say, more kind of enterprise, more of the kind of late majority, the shift was more about making this technology reliable and more secure and more stable, because this is the requirements of these new users of what was driving it. So I think that's the most interesting thing to see the change, is how different companies, different types of organizations have adopted this technology, which used to be, kind of niche and just maybe the Silicon Valley startups that we're playing with, and now it's all companies which are at least looking to see how can they leverage containers and Kubernetes and the different cloud native technologies. So it's been really interesting to see that change in that adoption. It's not to say that there hasn't been new things coming out. Obviously, there has been continuing to be new technology. eBPF is something which is really exciting, and see how that plays a part in different kind of observability tools or different kind of security aspects. And obviously, the big kind of question, in tech everywhere is, everybody's asking about AI, obviously, and where does that play a part? And it's interesting to see the CNCF specifically is really putting a push to make cloud native kind of the home of AI, of where you run and develop your workloads, which in some senses makes sense, right? Because a lot of the lessons, a lot of the patterns, the best practices that we've learned in kind of this DevOps and cloud native world are still very relevant if you're building and deploying AI applications. And in talking to some of the kind of AI startups, they come from a different background. So they don't necessarily have this background of, focusing on automation and continuous development. And so there's a lot of benefit that you can bring to these kind of organizations. So it makes sense of, maybe Kubernetes is a good place to run AI workloads. Maybe not all of them, but it'll be interesting to see how that space plays out. And kind of on the other AI side is all of the tools are kind of adding AI into them. So as a cloud engineer, the tools that are available to you now are really impressive. Whether it's from writing software or even writing infrastructure as code, looking at the security tooling and the impressive things that they can do. And observability is another really exciting one, of being able to make sense of your system. Just having some kind of a chatbot where you can ask intelligent questions rather than, I need to know a specific language like PromQL and write the right query to get the right information. I can ask relevant things like, hey, what's going on with my system, or why is this particular area slow, for example. So there's a lot of noise, I think, still to be found in the AI space, but it's definitely something that's exciting to see what it's going to look like in reality.
Yeah, and you mentioned that that conference, that there were like 12,000 people. So it seems that this network in this niche is growing, and I'm curious to hear your opinion about one of the aspects of this growth. And I'm talking about like open source, right? Open source played a big role in cloud native development. So where do you see open source fitting into cloud native development moving forward? Are there any, like projects you're particularly excited about in this niche?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? I feel like open source is going through some challenges recently, right? But like you say, it's the base of definitely everything around cloud native. The whole CNCF is really about open source and Kubernetes. I think open source, even going back to we're all running ideally on Linux and everything else. Like it is the basis of why we have what we do. But even from the early days, they were kind of they knew that we needed to develop new business models for open source to succeed, and that's been the big challenge I think over the past reality like 10 years or so. And there have been some success stories for sure, but there have been a lot of challenges, and especially the recent ones we've seen of Redis, right, and their license changes, and then CNCF, for example, backing Valky, which is kind of this open source thing, Terraform and their license changes, and then OpenTofu kind of forking and promoting the pure open source path. But then it's been some really interesting challenges which have come out recently of, well, potentially they took some code which they weren't allowed to. So there's been a lot of real difficulties in the open source space, and it's going to be interesting to see how we overcome that. And can't imagine a future without open source. That's how we get the innovation that we have. Mm-hmm. But the challenges remain of how do you make a business out of that? Because at the end of the day, there needs to be, it's costly, right, to have resources, to have people dedicated to building these things, and it needs to be funded somehow. So there are going to be some changes, I think, that will happen, especially in today's market where money isn't as freely floating around as it was for the past few years. But obviously, it's gonna need to be a central part, because that's kind of how we got to where we are.
Yeah, and speaking about like a talent, that obviously those guys are behind all those innovations, right? So it is interesting to know that Aptum has its headquarters in Canada, right? And at this point, you have around like 260 employees in North America specifically, right?
Yeah, North America as well as the UK.
Oh, you have some guys in the UK as well. So, but at this stage, we can say that your company is a remote first company, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're quite spread out. There are a couple of offices in different cities, but yeah, you'll find most of our folks working remote pretty much all the time.
Okay. So, and this push towards remote work, like after this pandemic, has made cloud native infrastructure even more essential, I guess, right? So how has this shift influenced Aptum's maybe approach to client service, and what approaches have you found helpful in dealing with remote work's challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's been some benefits and some challenges for sure. I think we've been remote friendly for a long time anyway. So in terms of like adapting internal processes, internal structures, that was pretty seamless. It's been more in terms of working with certain clients who may be more traditional and then had to make a bit of a shift. But honestly, it's been generally beneficial for them because, in a remote environment, it enforces kind of the best practices in terms of communication, right? And really, being clear about communications, having good communication channels, asynchronous, etc. And obviously the idea of leveraging a wider workforce and not just those who happen to be within, 20 kilometers of your office. So kind of going in and guiding companies adopting, cloud native technologies and processes. Part of that has also been like helping them set up to be successful in this remote world. And it also has opened up doors to us where maybe previously some companies would be also strict in terms of working with an external company. They need people on site because that just happens to be their kind of rules that were built in. But all of a sudden, one day to the next, those rules kind of had to get dropped. And so it opened the door for us to be able to work with companies that before wasn't really possible. there's definitely a certain part which is hard to make up for, right? That kind of face-to-face contact, and specifically in a consulting mandate, right? Being able to build those relationships early on is really important. So whenever possible, at least for kind of early engagements, try to maybe travel and do things on site just to get that initial contact. But then once that rapport is built, it makes it much easier once you go back and just kind of go into the regular remote flow. But there have been good technologies as well being built and kind of enable things remotely. There's numerous different whiteboard technologies which would replace maybe different exercises we would do in person. Now we can do remote via whiteboarding or different tools. So the tooling has definitely caught up as well. It's really about now kind of coaching and adapting people to the processes around it.
And talking about your personal experience, I checked your profile, and it seems to me that you used to live in Amsterdam, in San Francisco. Now you live in Canada. So this transitioning from Amsterdam to living remotely in Canada must have been like quite the shift for you personally as a manager, right? So. And I believe you also have experience working with talent internationally, you have experience with hiring and working with engineers from outside of Canada and the US. So with that, what was all your experience and knowledge? What are the biggest obstacles, biggest hurdles you have seen when it comes to hiring, maybe from different parts of the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it is being able to adapt to time zones, right, and just break away from this traditional 9 to 5, right, work hours. Which, hey, guess what? 40 years ago, when everybody was in an office or in a factory, yep, sure, that made sense, but it doesn't really make sense anymore. It's not necessarily the best way to do it. So that enables you to, one, provide freedom to people to kind of work when it suits them best, and adapt to people in different time zones. And again, it comes back to enforcing good communications strategies. So being able to communicate asynchronously, right? If need to send a message or something and I don't need a response right now, but it'll be out there and then people can kind of chime in when it suits best for them. There's obviously a balance to be maintained, because the risk then is, people kind of get attached to their apps and their devices and feel like maybe pressure to be always on or always connected, always respond. So there's definitely a coaching that needs to go on to ensure that people understand kind of the rules that are there. One of the other challenges is around, I guess, just getting used to different cultures. So I talked about, I was in Amsterdam for a number of years, and the company where I worked, we kind of kept a tally of the different nationalities of people, because it was just people were from all over. And honestly, that diversity that brought in was really beneficial. Just different ways of thinking or different kind of cultural aspects that people would bring. Really, I think, really helped in terms of how we would identify solutions or solve problems. But when you're used to more of a homogenous kind of workforce, when you first kind of open up and then people think differently or speak differently, it can be a bit of a shock initially. So you need to kind of be understanding of that to bring it in. But I think in the long run, it's immensely beneficial to have those different backgrounds and points of views.
And I would like to go a bit deeper there. So considering things like cultural differences, right? What has worked best for you in bringing this international talent together and making them feel like a part of the one team, right? Even when everyone's miles away.
Yeah, that's definitely a real challenge, and it's something I feel like everybody was trying to solve for a while. If you go back to kind of the beginning of the pandemic, and I don't know that anybody's found the solution that really replaces just getting everybody together in one place. So that's the thing that we definitely try to do. If even if it's once a year, trying to get folks face to face. But just it kind of blocking time for whether it's non-work related discussions or even just non-scripted discussions to kind of replace a little bit of the kind of water cooler talk of, hey, yes, we're all working on things day to day, but maybe share other things that are going on. And specifically, when you look at like cross team or cross department, I feel like that is something which has really been exacerbated by this, because even if you're, in communication day to day with your team and folks you're working on, we completely lose track of maybe the folks in marketing or the folks in sales. And those kind of silos really have a negative effect, right? If the folks in sales aren't aware at all of the engineering team and their challenges and their needs, and vice versa. So trying to create those connections between those teams is also really, really important.
Yeah, and considering your extensive background in leading and developing like a remote engineering team specifically, I'm curious about your viewpoint on talent. So, what, in your opinion, what qualities define an exceptional engineer? And my I guess follow up question: do you think there are differences in what makes an engineer like a great at working remotely compared to in an office?
That's the second part is an interesting question. It's not something I'd considered before. My initial reaction would be no, it's probably the same, but that I might need to think on that a little bit more. I think in terms of what makes an exceptional engineer, it probably depends a little bit on the use case, but specifically when I think of kind of or organizations, mostly organizations I've been a part of in kind of a professional services type perspective, where there's a lot of client interaction. There's definitely a stronger need than in other areas to have the communication skills. Which what I mean in terms of maybe being able to translate the deeply technical things you're working on to folks that are less technical. And honestly, I think it's a skill in any area, even if you're consulting or not. But being able to have that communication, that translation is really important. The other thing, which I think has been kind of a slow shift here, of moving away from what skills you have, what specific technologies you're familiar with, has become less and less important, I feel like, because it moves so fast. And yesterday's technology we might shift and replace that with something else tomorrow. So hey, guess what? Your 10 years of experience with MySQL, yeah, some of that is relevant. But what's more interesting to me is how quickly are you able to learn a new technology and kind of understand at a higher level the patterns that are involved there, and apply that from one technology, one space to another. So it's definitely a more difficult thing to kind of tease out, especially in an interview process. But I think that's something which makes exceptional engineers is people who are eager and really willing to learn new things, and to kind of spot those higher level patterns that can be translated across different spaces.
And you touched this a bit, but still, maybe you can give some more tips. What advice would you offer to individuals aspiring to join, like, for example, your team? How can they distinguish themselves during maybe the interview process? Any tips or advice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. One of the things which I notice, which will kind of strike me if I'm interviewing somebody in a positive way, is somebody who is going to ask more questions. Honestly, right? So if maybe you propose a specific technical challenge or a situation, there'll be some people who will dive right into what the solution is or what they feel they would do. Whether folks are going to start with questions and start from a curious attitude of teasing out different things. To me, that shows kind of a more mature mindset, or of okay, I need to understand the problem space. It's not black and white of 1 + 1 is 2, but in the reality, there's always different context which needs to be pulled in. So the more information I can get, then the better off I'm going to be able to provide not even the right, but maybe the best fit solution in this case.
Okay, so another question with more like talented engineers working from wherever they want, in fact, these days. So how do you see this international hiring changing? And what kind of maybe doors do you think this opens for tech people everywhere?
Yeah, it's a good question as well. I think we've already seen the shift away from like the tech, traditional tech centers, right? Well, if you want to be a great software engineer, you need to be in San Francisco, for example, right? That's created some positives of having a whole lot of really, excited folks in one space, and then working together and connecting and maybe coming up with new ideas, to just, even just in terms of the price of living and the availability there, causing huge challenges. So being able to start to decentralize has been a huge advantage. Maybe creating different pockets in different areas, and just the freedom of folks to be able to kind of work from where they want, right, or even where they're able, right. Not all of us have the freedom to decide where in the world I want to live, but for numerous reasons are in a certain place. So that shouldn't necessarily limit them in terms of the opportunities that are available. So, what we've seen of this kind of the globalization of hiring is that on the one hand, it provides opportunities to folks potentially wherever they are. And then obviously on the flip side, to companies, you're, like I mentioned, not just restricted to folks within a few kilometers, but can leverage global talent. I think we're going to continue to see that evolve. And you also see with that then kind of local communities pop up where folks still want to gain that kind of face-to-face contact potentially. But maybe you're the only person in your company, that in your city. So actually a previous company I was at, I was actually the only employee in Canada. And everybody was pretty remote, but at one point I kind of missed that contact. So I just got more involved in local communities and started working from kind of shared co-working spaces to build connections with other folks in similar situations. And I think that can create, one of those good relationships. But then again, you're connecting with folks who are at different organizations, solving different problems, and it can kind of create new ideas and new innovations.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your insights on this maintaining a strong team culture across different time zones, countries, right? On the qualities that define this exceptional engineer, the challenges with global hiring. So thank you for sharing all this, and we wish you and Aptum all the best moving forward. So keep up the fantastic work and take care.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate you taking the time and having me on today.